Welcome. And it looks like a few people were interested in yesterday's conversation, so I'm really glad about that. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we'll get into the text itself. Let me do that. And again, Moses, or our text, the Torah, trying to speak to us across the years, you might say, right? Shema Yisrael, pay attention, O Israel. So obviously it seems to be introducing something that is considered significant, right? Ata over hayom et hayardein. Today you are crossing over the Jordan. Lavo lareshet goyim, to come to inherit nations, gedolim v'atzumim, greater and mightier mimeka than you, arim gedolot uvetzurot, cities that are great and fortified, bashamayim, up to the heavens. In other words, the challenge is huge. That challenge is huge. There's no denying that the challenge is huge. And I'll do the Rashi, Gedolim v'atzumim mimeka, right? Great and more powerful than you. Ata atzum, you are powerful. V'hem atzumim mimeka, and they are more powerful than you are. So how might we actually look at this, which I think we can, as a metaphor? So we could take this as a metaphor for our lives, and that trying to overcome the challenges that we have in life are sometimes overwhelming. And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about a challenge that is overwhelming. Now, I'm saying I think we have to stick with the pshat. I think we are, in fact, talking about conquering the land of Canaan. But nevertheless, I think as literature, if we look at this as literature, then again, the importance of trying to see beyond the immediate and plain sense of these particular words as to how it might imply personally for us. So that would be one way to go. Not necessarily profound, but a way to go. Am gadol v'ram b'nei anakim, a great and again powerful nation, children of descendants of giants, asher ataya data, of which you have known, v'ata shamata, and you have heard or understood. You know what you're having to face. Mi yitatzev, okay, who can withstand lifnei bnei anak, before the descendants of Anak, the giants, right? So, v'yadata hayom, but you should know today, you should understand today, ki Hashem Elokecha, that it is the Lord your God, hu ha'over lefanecha, he is the one who's crossing over before you, esh ochla, a consuming fire, hu yashmidem, he will destroy them, v'hu yachni'em, and he will subdue them, lefanecha, before you. V'horashtam, and you shall inherit them, v'ha'avadatam, and you will destroy them, cause them to perish, maher, quickly. Ka'asher diber Hashem lach, just as the Lord your God, the Lord has spoken to you, has said to you. So, again, this is the kind of language that to me lets me know that even though as an individual, and even maybe as a people, when you contrast us as individuals in terms of both time and space, we occupy a very, very tiny little place. And my sense is, and I would love to be able to write about this in an articulate kind of way, that the greatest challenge we have, given our intelligence, given our understanding, given our abilities as human beings, is to discover significance. And I know this is not a new theme, and some of you have heard, maybe all of you have heard me speak about this before, but I believe it all comes down to this. And that, as given the fact that we have the intelligence that we have, whether or not we're able to articulate this, whether we're conscious of this or not, nevertheless, it is religion and our lives are all about the question of finding significance. And that is not a scientific question. What purpose do our lives hold? Scientifically, we could simply say it is to survive and to procreate. But I don't want to sense that that's all there is to life, and many of us are not able to or choose not to procreate. And as far as finding significance through our work and stuff like that, there are relatively very, very, very few people who actually are immortal in that particular way. It's a tiny, tiny percent. So what about most of us who will be forgotten after 4 generations, maybe, if not sooner than that? And this is what the Torah is trying to help us discover. How do you find significance? And to be even more specific, whenever we say Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav, right? Who made us, we translate it, who sanctified us through his mitzvot. I think a more accurate connotation would be who has made us significant through his mitzvot. This is totally unscientific. And yet it is about life. And if you look at people's behavior and the choices people make, a lot of it can be tied to their attempt to find significance. And I think that there is a certain kind of joy that you experience as a human being when in fact you discover this, what it is to be significant. And of course, we know being loved and being able to love, part of that, but there's more to it than that. And of course, as you've heard me say, there are times when people confuse love with lust. Lust is an appetite. Love is something else. It may involve the appetite, but not necessarily the same. Let me keep going. So again, this is the whole enterprise. This is the enterprise. And finding a place in which to be able to do this, the idea of finding the land of taking over the land of Canaan, of having the promised land, is that it is in that land that certain commandments, certain mitzvot can be fulfilled. And to be able to devote yourself in that particular way. And of course, finding ways in which to feel that we are devoting our lives is also an extremely satisfying enterprise. Because also being devoted is also a purpose. It's purposeful. So onwards. Al tumar bilvavcha. Do not say in your hearts, in other words, don't think, V'hadof Hashem Elokecha. This is an interesting statement. And if I hadn't read this before, I wouldn't necessarily think that Moses was going into this direction. But he's actually going to refer to a potential, what I would call pernicious underbelly. So do not think in your hearts, V'hadof Hashem Elokecha otam milfanecha, that when the Lord your God, right, pushes them away before you, right? Lamor, to think, Betzidkatchi, it is through my righteousness, Hevi'ani Hashem, has the Lord brought me, La Reshit et Haaretz, to inherit Haaretz Hazot, to inherit this land. Uverishat Hagoyim Ha'eleh. So I believe this he's saying, because this could go two ways, but it says, and in the wickedness of these nations, Hashem Morisham Mipanecha, that the Lord your God is disinheriting you. So it sounds like both a positive and a negative in combination. In other words, the reason why they are, can I say, entitled, right? So it does sound like a sense of entitlement, and he's warning them not to feel entitled, right? That it's a combination of their righteousness, the righteousness of the Israelites, and the wickedness of the current inhabitants, and that's why this is taking place. And he goes to emphasize this. Lo betzidkatcha, it is not through your righteousness, uveyosher levavcha, or the rightness of your hearts, right? Ataba la reshet, that you are coming to inherit et artsam, their land. Ki verishat hagoyim ha'ela, it is only on account of the wickedness of these nations, Hashem Elohecha morisham mipanecha, that the Lord your God is disinheriting them before you. Ulaman hakim, and there's one other reason, in order to establish et hadavar, the thing, the word, asher nishba Hashem lavotecha, which the Lord swore to your ancestors, LaAvraham, LaYitzchak, UleYaakov, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So yes, there is a privilege in being their descendants, but we could in fact look at that a little bit and ask the question, what is it to be a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And I believe it has to do with sharing the kinds of values, the love of God, the love of humanity, the kindness, the kinds of lives, and their willingness to make sacrifices. And for Jacob, so for Abraham, chesed, right? Being kind. Isaac, the willingness to accept God's judgments. And Jacob, I think, is to learn. Not necessarily that Jacob was such a righteous person to begin with, but in the course of his life and in facing so many levels of adversity, he becomes a different person. So do we have that capability? We have some Rashis that I did not cover yet. So we'll take a look. Al tormar bilvavcha, do not say in your heart, tzidkatchi, that it is my righteousness, verishat ha'ovdei kochavim, and the wickedness of these idol worshippers that caused the skarmu, caused it. Lo betzidkatcha, of course, right? Moses is emphasizing it is not through your righteousness, ata ba la reshet, that you are coming to inherit, ki berishat hagoyim, right? But, right? And he says, but the wickedness of these nations, hare ki, he says, the word ki, meshamesh belashon ella, can also be understood as meaning but. It is only through that. And, of course, the fact that you're descendants of these great ancestors. V'yadata, and you shall understand, you should know, ki lo b'tzidkatcha Adonai Elech. Look at how Moses is emphasizing this. That there's, and what is this pointing towards? It's trying to destroy a sense of holier than thou or arrogance, any kind of arrogance that we might have and to understand how privileged we really are, and not that we're entitled to that privilege, but it comes with a responsibility, and it really is. That's really what Moses is trying to say to us. And for me personally, I think that this is a very powerful, powerful message for us as individuals in terms of how we look around the world and count our blessings and not look down on other people. It's so important. Okay. And as far as discussing the wickedness of quote, quote, of those other nations, I think it's more in terms of not being drawn to those choices and to recognize what poor choices they are. But we are not the ones to judge them, right? We have to look into ourselves. So, and know, I'll go back over this, and know and understand that it is not through your righteousness, Hashem Elokecha, that Hashem your God, nor ten lecha et haaretz, is giving you this the land Hatova Hazot, this good land, Lirishta, to inherit. Look at what he says. Ki am kshe orif ata. He says, you are a stiff-necked people. So here we have that phrase, that statement. What do we mean? I know some of you do know already, but it is a metaphor referring to an ox and the fact that you are not willing to accept the yoke. This is the metaphoric way of saying, ain't no one gonna tell me what to do. And the idea of the mitzvot, we talk about the ol mitzvot. The word ol is the word for yoke, and ol mitzvot, the yoke of the commandments, the willingness to accept this idea of having commandments, of accepting these divine, what we understand as of commands of a divine origin. And again, I think their purpose is to give us significance. That in fulfilling these things, our lives take on a greater meaning, and we have a reason for passing through this world. And also, of course, to never forget that it starts with the sense of appreciation. Zachor, he really is being emphatic here. Remember, al tishkach, do not forget, et asher hiktsafta et Hashem Elokecha, how you angered, right? You caused anger to the Lord your God. Pamidbar, in the wilderness. Lemin hayom asher yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim, from the day when you departed the land of Egypt, ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh, up until your arrival in this place. Mamrim heitem, you were rebels im Hashem, with God. Let's make sure. Okay, keep going. Uva Chorev, and at Mount Sinai, hiktzaftem et Hashem, you provoked, right? You provoked Hashem, God. Vayitanaf Hashem bachem, to the point where Hashem was angered with you, lahashmid etchem, to destroy you. So again, we have to be careful about using expressions of emotion to God, and we are using, again, human expressions to try and express what is very hard to express. But there's this idea that when we move away and act selfishly, and when we allow our impulses to control ourselves, we actually run counter to our very purpose of our existence. We, in a sense, deny our value through our lives and through our choices and through our behaviors. So there's a great discipline involved in this, right? I mean, that's really what's going on here. Ba'aloti hahara, when I went up to the mountain, lakachat luchot ha'avanim, to take the tablets of stone, luchot habrit, the tablets of the covenant. So covenant, right? This relationship that we have with our Creator. Asher karat Hashem machem, which Hashem established, it literally means to cut with you, but that's the verb that is used in making a covenant, right? That the Hashem established with you. Va'ayshev bahar, and I remained in the mountain, arba'im yom, 40 days, va'arba'im laila, and 40 nights. Lechem lo achalti, I didn't eat any bread. Excuse me. Umayim lo shatiti, and I didn't drink any water. Excuse me. One moment. Let's go back here. Va'eshev bahar, and I remained, I dwelt in the mountain, and from Tractate Megillah, ein yeshiva. So he says that the term yeshiva, to remain, ela lashon akeva, it has the connotation of delay, of being held up. Excuse me one second. So again, he wasn't present, right? He remained in the mountain. And again, sometimes we use the expression of going up the mountain as a metaphor to mean, trying to gain a more spiritual journey, that going up the mountain is a description of a spiritual journey, and that, you can't just, and it has to do possibly with a certain loneliness that comes along with that, because people don't necessarily share that sense of spirituality. And I'm not saying that it applies in that sense here necessarily, but it definitely has to do with the level of connection that is being expressed here and communicated here, as to Moses going to a place where he could be and speaking about not eating any bread or drinking any water, having to do with this great spiritual connection that he had at that moment with the divine, to a point where he could get the Torah. And I think it's also simply contrasting those two elements that we have as human beings, right? That using the metaphor of going and getting bread, right, has to do with our worldly occupations, not necessarily just food preparation. Although if you look at, and by the way, of course, food preparation is a necessity. But we've already come across that verse that says, man doesn't live by bread alone. But here, this is to emphasize the level of spirituality in contrast to the worldliness. Again, if we look at this as literature, Vayiten Hashem Elai, and the Lord gave to me et shnei luchot ha'avanim, these two tablets of stone. So now again, the idea of them being of stone has to do, I believe, with connoting permanence and stability, and this element of unchangeability. So if you look at the Ten Commandments, how foundational they are. But we recognize, and we put this all the way back, because we say that God gave Moses both the written Torah, which would be an extreme example, would be these tablets of stone, and an oral Torah, which has to do with how you apply these things, and the fact that you have to have flexibility and measure, and the idea, of course, of circumstances alter cases, so that it becomes a living reality. And that, I think, is so powerful here, because one can be religious, in a sort of idealistic kind of way. And we don't want the Torah to only be a matter of ideals. It has to be lived ideals. That's the idea. So, Ketuvim, look at this beautiful metaphor. Written be'etzba Elohim, with the finger of God. So again, you look at this material and you kind of process it in your mind and through your rational and your emotional feelings? What do you feel when you come across that kind of statement? Saying, because to me, what this is connoting is a level of intimacy that God is having with human beings, that there's a point of connection here between God and human beings. And of course, I'm sure some of you may already be thinking about that fantastic Michelangelo picture in the Sistine Chapel of God creating human beings, right? And touching with a finger. So, va'alehem kechol hadvarim, and upon them all these words, asher diber Hashem imachem, which the Lord spoke with you, spoke to you, bahar, in the mountain, mitoch ha'esh, from the midst of the fire, bayom hakahal, on the day of gathering. Now again, looking at this and trying to see what literary elements there are. What's the significance of fire? And we know that fire is powerful, fire can destroy, but fire can also be a very important part of change. So that as human beings, as these brittle human beings, we need to be able to, right, eliminate the negative and accentuate the positive. And what we're talking about is this transformative power that these concepts have to change the very nature of our lives. And fire is such a great metaphor for that ability. Excuse me. Let me see where we are. Right, here we go. Okay. Vayhi miketz arba'im yom, and it was at the end of 40 days, va'arba'im laila, and 40 nights. And by the way, you can keep on deconstructing. Why is he separating out 40 days and 40 nights? Has that got something to do possibly with the fact that we have both positive mitzvot and negative mitzvot, the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots? Or does it have to do with the idea, and this is a very important element too, that in the process of having this communicated to Moses, there were moments of silence for Moses to absorb and to process what was going on? But at any rate, at the end of 40 days and 40 nights, Natan Hashem Elai et shnei luchot ha'avanim. God, Hashem, gave to me the 2 tablets of stone, luchot habrit, the tablets of the covenant. Rashi on this points out that in the Torah itself, it's spelled lamed chet taf, and it's pronounced luchot, but there's no vav here, right? There's not this letter. And normally a plural is with that, okay? Is written with that when it's a feminine plural. Here, so for example, here luchot is written with the vav. But why is it written without here? And he says, it's written as if it was luchat. Luchat. It's written, ketiv, shtehem shavot, because both of them are of equal value. They correspond to each other. And again, why dafka 2 tablets, right? What's the significance? And I think it has to do with how binary the universe is, okay? And another binary concept could well be that some have to do with bein ha'adam lamakom, between a human being and the divine, uvein adam lachavero, and between a human being and his neighbor, his associate. So that there's this balance, right, between being directed vertically and horizontally, and that the 2 are of equal value. So again, just taking the time to think about what are these words trying to convey to us. And I'm going to stop here, and we have one more day in which to contemplate this material. And I've set the bookmark. I'm going to stop the share And I don't know if anyone wants to make any comments at this point. Okay. Any thoughts before I stop the recording? No comments? Going once, going twice? All right, I'll stop the recording.